Hi, I'm Anastasia, and this is my engineering design project, and I chose to do the electronics project, which was the Arduino. For the introduction, Arduino is an electronics program that is able to read inputs and turn them into outputs. Arduinos can be used to program just about anything you can think of, and they have many uses in the real world, like LEDs, traffic lights, motors, or just any kind of interactive item. The goal of this project was to learn about how Arduinos are used and programmed, and to create and code our own circuit projects using an Arduino. In order to achieve this goal, I followed the instructions from the project manual to learn about the different functions of Arduinos and how to implement them into various circuits. What I did in particular was to use Tinkercad to set up my circuit before I made it with the kit, which was helpful for me to plan things out ahead of time. This also allowed me to test out my code ahead of time as well, and I was able to debug my circuit and see if any problems came up. I found that this was an easier process on Tinkercad than it was with the actual Arduino, so that's why I did it. Here you can see one of the circuits that I did on Tinkercad, and I was able to organize my circuit and make sure that all of my wiring and code was effective. Experimental setup. The Arduino kit was constructed and tested according to the modules from the project manual, which gave background information about each type of circuit and shows connection schematics. From the manual, I completed Project 2.1 LED and Project 2.2 RGB LED, and I picked these two because I personally like working with circuits that have lights, so these were the ones that had that. From this project kit, I didn't use all of the materials just because I didn't need to for the projects that I completed, but I did use the Arduino and its USB connector, the breadboard, the 220 ohm resistors and 1 kilo ohm resistors, the RGB LED, red, yellow, and blue LED lights, and the jumper wires in various colors that connect the circuits together. And this kit altogether was $18. So for the results for my first project, this project was the LED project, and the module in the project manual was a bit simple. It just had one LED. So I chose to do it with 3 LEDs for fun, to make it a little bit more complex. And so first I planned this out in Tinkercad just to have the wiring set up, the code, and everything. And then after that, I built it with the kit, and then I had to make sure that everything was functioning properly. And the first time I created this circuit, I did it with a 220 ohm resistor, which is like the standard for this kind of LED. And then the second time I did it, I replaced those resistors with the 1 kilo ohm resistors. And in these pictures, you can see that the stronger resistors produce circuits with dimmer lights because the resistors limit the amount of voltage that can go through those LEDs. The second project I did was the RGB LED project, and the idea of these RGB LEDs is that you can produce any one color from this light by adjusting the brightness of each color, the red, green, and blue LEDs, to mix any color on the color spectrum. And here you can see what the code looks like for this circuit. Each color on the RGB is set to a different pin on the Arduino, so the brightness of each LED is entered that way with the pins with the code. And then that's the code for producing light that flashes between red, green, and blue. And then you can see it here on the video that I completed this circuit and it flashes between red, green, and blue. And then the project manual also included instructions for uploading a sketch for the Arduino, and this sketch had code that allowed the RGB LED to cycle through different colors while fading in between. And I just had to define the pins, which pin was red, green, and blue. And then you can see this happen on the video once I uploaded it onto the circuit. The colors just fade together. So for the Excel chart for this project, I decided to make a visual interpretation of what the code from the second module is doing in order to produce these different colors of light. And I made this chart by entering data into Excel for how bright each of the LEDs are in order to make these given colors. And by adjusting the brightness of these red, green, and blue LEDs, you can produce pretty much any color you want. And for red, green, and blue, as you can see, you make those colors by just setting that color to max brightness and then setting the other two colors to 0. And then for any color that's not red, green, or blue, you adjust the brightness of multiple different LEDs and produce a different colored light. And then for white, you set the brightness of all 3 colors to the maximum. And this chart is just helpful to see how these color combinations work out in order to produce these different colors of light. For conclusions and recommendations for this project, I learned a lot about the functions of Arduinos and how to program them to perform different tasks, like in the LED and RGB LED projects that I completed. The part of this project that I'd like to emphasize is how beneficial it was for me to create and test the circuits on Tinkercad beforehand, before I did them with the actual kit. And I feel as though this step made the debugging process of the project a lot easier for me, and it helped me like manage my time more effectively. And this experiment was important for learning the basics of programming with Arduinos and debugging various circuits. Many electrical components of items in our daily lives are composed of Arduinos, so it's important for engineers to understand how they work.